We understand construction. I think how we can help is identifying that risk up front and enabling the transparency that our tools bring to the table.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us. And I get the floor for myself tonight, which is fantastic, to talk to a man. I've known for a while, I would say, Cam, but we've never got you on the podcast. But Cameron Mills, welcome to the podcast, mate. How are you?
Thank you, Val. I'm very well. Pleasure to be here finally after all these years.
I'll tell you what, mate. I've been looking forward to this day because we offline we talk about project controls as if it's the most wonderful thing in the world, and we've never been able to kind of capture it online for others. But because it is your first time, Cam, I would love to know, first of all, before we get into the details, where did the project controls career start from you? How did you get into this space?
Yeah, sure. It started 27, 28 years ago when I met my now wife at university, and I was doing a Bachelor of Arts degree, majoring in history and sub-majoring in English literature. And her father had a construction company, and I found out what teachers earned and what he'd paid me to go out and be a labourer and learn how to build roads and operate in the construction industry. So I took that route, and over many years, continued education. Did postgrad certs and master's degrees in project management, and went on the contractor side, and just found my way up the chains that way, pretty much from being in the trenches and on the ground building roads and so on, and stormwater drainage and all this sort of stuff up into the contracting world. And then just always looking for my niche in that area. And what I found really quickly when you got into tier one construction companies is there was a lot of project managers, and you'd be tendering one or two jobs at a time, and it'd be whoever was next in line to have that opportunity to run that project. So you supported each other a lot, but there weren't a lot of opportunities. So then about 15 to 20 years ago, 15, I suppose, I started diversifying into project controls. I saw a real niche for, specialized cost, risk, time, quality, change, these sort of core skill sets that your standard project managers and engineers were so busy running contracts that they weren't really specializing in those areas. So I started really focusing on those areas. And over the last 15 years, have just sort of grown and developed a real core niche for what you'd call the project controls. And what's amazing is, 10 years ago, the roles that we're seeing now weren't there, right? So but now the roles I've been in and the ones you see on LinkedIn and so on, it's an entire new industry now, a real specialized industry as well. You still have your delivery teams out there going on and delivering the works, but every mega project now or major project has this specialized project controls team. So it's become a real vocation. You've gone from having a team of 3 or 4 to over 100 in certain projects. So that's what I did. Yeah, it's just basically time in the trade, identifying the areas that really appealed to me and the things I loved to do, and focusing passionately on that.
That's brilliant. What is it that draws you to project controls other than it's a great role? Is there something specific in project controls you just love to get your hands into?
Yeah, I'm the sort of guy that most people see walk up into a room and their eyes roll over in their head and, oh God, not that guy again. We're talking about cost, we're talking about time, we're talking about risk. To be fair, having spent all those years actually delivering projects, I realized that those fundamentals of understanding what the scope was, delivering it through a program, aligning it to cost, understanding how risk plays into that, managing change, how to sort of try and meet the project objectives through your deliverables. That's the stuff I really liked. I mean, I still love going into project reviews. I still love, and I spent some time going all around the world reviewing various projects. And even in my previous role, every single month you've got your monthly review. And I love that stuff, seeing how, people are progressing against their plan. If they're not meeting their plan, what do they understand why? What are they doing to correct it moving forward? I really do get off on project performance and on and that sort of project control stuff. I find the day-to-day being out there physically building something now is a bit boring for me. I'm not into that, but much more into understanding how their program is, how they're traveling on costs and how we can sort of help people. But it definitely is an absolute passion for mine, and I've been accused of that many times. And the people who've worked with me and around me know that I'm immensely passionate about it, as you do as well. because we share that similar. There's only, I mean, you and I are talking offline. There's only a very small core set of people that I believe talk our language and can actually walk, talk the talk and walk the walk. There's a lot of people out there that do talk the talk, but not a lot have actually gone out there and can add value on the ground. And I pride myself in being able to do that, and I really do enjoy it.
Yeah, you can certainly tell when you talk about it, your eyes light up, and my eyes definitely don't roll back in my head, Cam, because I'm absolutely with you. There's something about controlling chaos. I mean, these mega projects, and particularly in Australia, because that's where we are, they have so many problems at scale, right? So many challenges, let's call them, and you're constantly solving and trying to save the day effectively. I mean, your job is really, as an integrated body in the project control space, is to be the informant, right? You're the guy or girl that actually has the better or the best view of the project as a whole, and you know how all the systems work together, so you can advise people on where they should be doing and what they should be doing. And I think that's a lot of fun too. I think it's a great job, which is funny because I think we're still kind of only just touching just tipping the iceberg of what project controls can do in Australia. We're really quite immature because, as you said, there's only a handful of people probably, and we know them probably all as well, that they really, really live and breathe project controls. And so, great segue into the theme of this podcast, Cam, which we talk about the future of not just project controls, but I suppose project management and projects in general, because we have that worldly view of integrated project controls and how it affects projects. If you don't do it right, it can have disastrous results. Is that true?
Absolutely. I think that the permanence of project controls is absolutely is paramount now. In my last role with the Victorian Government North East Link program, project controls is put into a position and platform and supported by executive like I've never seen. The chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, they really valued significant project controls, and across the whole government organisation, you're starting to see that come along now. And even where I am now, I'm advising, consulting in the suburban rail loop at the moment, and same thing. Absolutely recognise that they need significant, strong project controls. These things are so large and so many moving parts, and you're talking billions and billions of dollars. You're talking so many pressures and so many things, as you say, that could go wrong. Having significant, strong project controls it's a no-brainer now. It's not an argument anymore. 5-10 years ago, maybe you'd have a few people saying, "Oh, the project managers do that, the engineers do that, other functions do that," but you don't have those arguments now. It's no, we desperately need some help in here. We need to know what's going on. And for me, if I'm a project director or a CEO of a project or a crew or anything like that, fundamentally, I'd want an immensely strong project controls team. I want to know what's going on. I want, reliable, accurate information in a timely manner to make informed decisions. And you try and think logically beyond that. How on earth can you operate without that? What are you making decisions on if you don't have that timely, accurate, reliable information? And you see it all too often where you're making it on poor information, which leads to poor decisions. And so many projects, when you read the lessons learned, when you have conversations with the people and you hear what really happened and went on, it's not rocket science. It's very easy to see that if you don't have the right people in place, the process in place, the technology in place supporting, you're most likely not going to succeed.
Yeah, good point. And I think that brings us into our next conversation around just the access. I mean, one of the challenges I think Australia has, and maybe it's more broader than that, is just the scarcity of skills in the market. And we talked about this before we went on record, and we talked about how we want to get more people into project controls. And I think there are some people trying to do that. We obviously have also the Project Controls Expo. I think we have a diploma now of project controls in Australia for those that are here, very similar to the UK. But how do we then take it to the next level? Because if we are talking about the future, you got to get them while they're young, Cam, right? So how do we inspire the next generation of project controls practitioners from your perspective?
Yeah, I've got to be careful I say this. Look, for me, you hear a lot of conversations around, going to universities and trying to get people and convince them away from engineering and all these sort of things. I think you've got to go younger than that. And particularly when you're looking at things like gender diversity, for instance, we know that the statistics relating to female participation in engineering degrees is really, really low. and other sort of construction related degrees is low. So I think going to high schools in year 9, year 10, when they're looking at what they want to do for VCE and onwards, that's where you need to be able to try and attract people into your field. I've been very blessed for the last 15 years. Majority of my team have had a gender balance, which is in the positive on the female side. And I truly believe that's because a lot of people are using project controls as an avenue into construction, but also I get a lot of people who have been in mainstream engineering companies, and they just get sick of all what they've got to put up with in that side, and they want to specialize and diversify. So I've been very blessed to have some amazing people working with me, and I've understood those sort of problems and tried to advocate for how we can sort of certainly improve that element of it. But to get in, it's quite fascinating. The main draw into project controls is typically engineering, right? And I've been saying for a few years, I did a bit of study on it. The civil engineering degree in Australia is 4 years. There's 18 units, and only one of them is an introduction to project controls. So I feel sorry for a lot of engineers, and I'm not an engineer, but I feel sorry for a lot of my friends and colleagues. And I say to them, you're not equipped and qualified to actually, be a project manager. And they say, of course we are. We're engineers. I say, well, show me where you've received your, academic qualification for project management, your industry accreditation, your skill sets. And what I said last week, I had the conversation about this at the Project Controls Expo in my speech, and I was talking about, project management is supported globally by public-private institutions and academia associations, anchored in ever-developing methodology through standards, practice guidelines, and so on. And yet, mega project performance continues to be heavily maligned. I mean, you only have to read, anything that Bent Fluberg produces, particularly in his most recent book. And you do, and I did a chart from a presentation that focused on that. And when you look at the iron law of mega project management, which is over time, over budget, and not achieving benefits over and over again. The statistics, I mean, they had a data set of 16,000 projects, 20 fields, 136 countries. Out of that, 0.5% of projects came out on budget, on time, and hit their benefits. 99.5 either missed budget, schedule, or some form of benefits. And the data is overwhelming that things aren't the performance side of things aren't going that well. So I started to question myself, saying, well, maybe we've got the wrong people. Maybe we're drawing from the wrong people. And then over the last few years, I've been broadening from, it doesn't have, when I started in government to get a job in project controls, it was mandatory you had an engineering degree. When I left government, we changed that, and it wasn't mandatory anymore. It was an equivalent degree. You could have done construction management or anything that was slightly related to it. You could have done some sort of, as you say, diploma or anything like that, depending on the level you're coming in. So broadening the avenues is really important, right? And I think that for me, it's a career in project controls is 3 things. One, it's some form of educational basis. So if you do a bachelor's degree in something that's not related, doing a postgraduate certificate or doing a master's degree in project management, I think is very important. I think the other thing is joining one of the many associations and getting professional certification through those institutions. So Australian Institute of Project Management, APM in the UK, you've got ACES, you've got Engineers Australia. There's a lot of these professional entities. I myself have, I think 3 accreditations with 3 of those entities. And every time you do one, you're learning more, and you're involving yourself in elements and progressing. And the third core component is experience. So educational qualification, industry certification, and participation in industry bodies, enhancing your knowledge and experience. I have so many young people these days in such a rush to get ahead, and I keep saying to them, when you get into my position, the core thing that you have that makes you successful in your role is the decades you put in before. All of the mistakes you've made, all of the things that have worked well, that is what you're drawing and relying upon. So if you get these young people that advance too quickly, when they have to rely on experience, it's not there. So those 3 things: education, industry association and certification, and experience. That's what you're seeking.
Yeah, that's great. And you really touched on an interesting point, which we've also talked about many times, is I get it. There's an eagerness to learn and an eagerness to grow and climb the ladder and all that stuff. But I think and I think we're all in this point, and maybe it's a very stoic view, but you've got to have some battle scars. You've actually got to have some challenges on the way to really appreciate how projects work, and that only comes with time. I don't think there's any replacement for experience on the job, if you like.
Yeah.
Because you learn nuances, because there is no perfect formula or methodology for project controls. Same as projects, they're all quite unique and different. They have various challenges from people, process, tools, etc. But one of the biggest challenges, as you just mentioned, and we talked about this as well, is that, if there is someone trying to climb the ladder, what's the best way for them? Because not career advice, but what are you seeing in the market that's causing a bit of a stir at the moment in terms of people pushing too fast or trying to punch above their weight, perhaps in the project controls industry?
I think people are relying on technology too much. I think there's no doubt about that. I mean, you've heard me say this many times before. I think technology is there to support process and support people. I think people think they can go out and they can learn a particular product or a particular piece of technology, and that makes them that. The most famous one is planning and scheduling. So I've met more schedulers than I ever have planners. So I always look for people who are planners, and these are people who have been on construction sites and can build things. Like, they can break it down into its component parts. They understand the scope of the project, how it gets built, how to stage it, how to, the sequencing, all this sort of stuff. And then you've got the schedulers who can drive P6, right? So you do walk in and you see a lot of people, and they come and they interview with you and so on, and you learn really quickly if they're a planner and scheduler, so someone who can build something and drive the software, or they're just a scheduler. And the problem with just schedulers are, and I've had many over the years, is that you have to sit them there and they can drive P6, but your construction manager is sitting next to them telling them what to do all the way through. And I've seen that a lot. So I think the over reliance on technology is an issue. I remember being on a project over 15 years ago called the Westgate Free Alliance here in Melbourne, and at that time it was a very large project, big road project in the centre of Melbourne. And I think back to the calibre and the quality of the people that were on that project, and I don't think I've ever worked on a project with such a group of 18 people I've ever seen. And you look at where a lot of those people are now, and they're in very senior positions all around the industry across Australia. They're all through the tier 1 organisations. They're in government. They're doing a lot of things. Now, since that job 15 years ago, what I've seen is a dilution of experience and skill set. So you're taking those sort of really core people and you're putting them off into other areas, and then you're having to build these teams. We are in the biggest civil infrastructure boom we've ever seen right now. The opportunity for entities, both client and contractor side, to actually fill the roles that they need to is very unlikely. There's a massive capacity and skill set issue across the board in all roles. And the problem with that is, because it's so diluted at that experience level, you're going to bring people in who are new. You're going to bring people in who years ago would have been developed and trained and educated in the ways of project management, and they just won't. So what they're doing now is there's an over-reliance on technology. I'm seeing young kids that you sit down and you ask them to do something, and they straight onto ChPP, and they're saying, how do we write a formula for this? How do we do that? And look, there's a place for it. Don't get me wrong, but it's almost like you're not thinking through a problem. You're being informed by technology to how to do something. And what worries me, and that was the fundamental element that I was trying to get across in my presentation last week at PCE, was they're not learning the fundamental skill sets enough. And the people who are above them who do have that, they're so flat out and spread so thin, they haven't got the time to train and develop them enough as well either. So a lot of these projects are fairly chaotic, and it's you don't have that development element in there anymore. So that's what I see as a bit of an issue. I see that there is an over-reliance on technology. People think that you bring in a software product and it's going to answer all the problems for you. And I have this conversation with vendors all the time. Every time I go to a conference, and I do spend a lot of time professionally working with vendors as well. I'm very fond of Innate, and most people know that it's a good product, and they're a great company to work with, because they're very open and receptive to developing their product and improving and helping. But I say it all the time. I said, you guys get out there and you promise all this stuff, and out of the box, plug and play, and away you go. And it's not the answer. It's a part of it, but it doesn't work like that. And when people are inexperienced, they buy that. They drink the Kool-Aid, as they say, and they think that the technology is going to do everything for them. And you see failed implementations of technology, and you see having technology doesn't work if you haven't got the right process and the right people and the skill set to understand how to, what you're using it for. But that's my biggest bugbear at the moment. And I know we're at different ends of the spectrum. You're very advanced in the, where you think the technology going, very bullish. I'm with you on that, but I'm also, let's not forget the basics. Let's make sure that people understand how to plan a project, how to estimate a project, how to manage a budget, how to perform integrated change control, how to manage risk. That's what I'm worried about, is those skill sets are being diluted now.
Yeah, it is an interesting point, and I definitely agree with you. And I think 90% of the time when I do work on projects, because I am in the consulting space, is going back to the fundamentals. It's never about the fancy tools. I would love if projects would just go to them, but they can't, because 90% of the time they don't have the fundamentals in place. There's some area that could always do with an improvement. And you're right, because we are kind of like plumbers in a sense. We are kind of connecting various parts of the mothership together, right? There are elements where if this isn't connected to this, so if A doesn't connect to B, you've got a problem, or you're not going to get the right information, or you're not going to be able to do this fast. I also get your point as well, just before that, on planners and particular schedulers. But they're not the only ones. You have the same problem with risk in particular. You kind of have these high level kind of corporate risk guys where, the risk appetite for businesses is different to project risk, which is it's a real big problem. And the other way around, you get a really light touch on risk, and so I don't even want to jump in here, but it is a challenge because the roles aren't necessarily standardized across the business. And so maybe I'll just jump in with I think one of the other things from a not a barrier to entry, but maybe because we've also seen these other organizations kind of cloak project controls in its essence, PMOs as such. And I think Australia's been very interesting because it hasn't really done that, particularly for government projects. And in Victoria and New South Wales, we've actually done away with PMOs. We do still have them. They are in there. There's an interesting dilemma. And I've had a few people on from the UK talk about PMO, and it's a different organization over there, right? PMO is different over there. It's very, very mature. Project controls is part of that. But here it's like, actually, we've got a vertical and it's project controls, and that's what we need for now. What's your kind of take on that before we get into the future of that? Because that's an interesting observation. Yeah.
It's funny. I've sort of come around full circle. I mean, I've worked in PMOs where I've run PMOs, and I've worked in standalone project controls. I think, to take it back a step, one of the fundamental problems we've got, and Fluberg talks about this, there's no unified theory, I should say, of project management, right? And one of the fundamental issues that I've been harping on about for years is, I really believe there's a gap between project management theory, an organization's strategic application, and an organization's tactical application at project level. There is a significant gap there. So when you look at an organization strategically, they borrow from theory where it suits them. Sometimes they understand it, sometimes they don't. Problem is that theory is not unified, so it's quite sporadic in areas. Many contravening theories and so on, and approaches. And then they come across with a standardized approach that they think will work for their organization. But then when you go down and you evaluate the projects, they're all working differently. It's like a box of chocolates, right? So some are taking a little bit from corporate, but most are just going from project to project, either doing what they did before or redeveloping it, right? So the actual consistency in application is all over the shop. And that's why people like you and I can make a career now, because you're going in there trying to help and stabilize that and bring it back to some sort of normalcy. So it doesn't help us that there's no real standardized approach. The other thing is that worries me a little bit is all of these different institutions and PMI and AIPM and APM, they're all racing off developing their own bodies of knowledge and going down their own areas. So if you're a younger person and you're trying to make sense, and I have conversations every single week, either mentoring people or just cups of coffee, and people asking the same stuff we're talking about now. How do you get in? How do you advance? How do you make head in the tail? What certification should I get? What should I join? And it's a bit of a minefield out there. And I know I will get you a question in a second, but a couple of other things that doesn't help us is the things like, as I said, very confusing landscape regarding the associations and what degrees to take and so on. But even the variety of methodologies, Agile, Waterfall, Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, Prince2, Six Sigma, CPM, XP, APF, Lean. It confuses the living heck out of those of us who've been doing this for nearly 3 decades, let alone the ones who are coming into it. So I think that's a fundamental issue that needs to be resolved. But look, I think that until we can get that sort of standardization and we can somehow collectively improve how we do it, you're always going to get that box of chocolates. Now, from a PMO perspective, when I first started doing it, you were a project controls component in the PMO, so you still had you had finance, you had IT was in there. There's all these. There was no rules around what was really in the PMO, and the lack of standardization also has an impact on how you actually apply. Each time you go into an organization or a project, they say, "Oh, we want you to come in and bring project controls." You say, "Well, what does that mean to you?" So in the States, it's very much cost and time. In Australia and Asia and the UK, cost, time, risk comes in a lot more. There is risk in the States, but really cost and time, and then there's change and scope. I've always been a much broader applicant. So I think project controls teams, or you could even call them PMOs, have worked best that I've worked with or run when I've had much broader functions. So cost, time, risk, change, obviously, quality comes in there, finance, procurement, contract admin, and contract management come in as well. So when you think of the PMI core areas, the only areas you're not really touching are communications and stakeholder. Everything else out of those PMI core areas, I think that if you want me to be immensely effective, then put those functions under me in a run team, and that what that enables you to do when you put your digital technologies together, your enterprise architecture. You've got an ERP or a finance system, you've got your contract management and your procurement system feeding into it, you've got your cost engineering solution coming off it, you've got your planning system and they're integrated with cost and time, you've got your risk system, and it's all in that one enterprise environment, and then you're running it off into whatever you're doing, your data warehouse, your data lakes, whatever you want to put on the end of that for your reporting and your analytics and so on. But I've worked in projects where and my recent one was similar to that, where you've got 3 directors looking after what you would normally want to look after. So there'd be one looking after finance, one looking after commercial and legal, which includes contract management, procurement, and then you've got cost, risk, time, and so on. So you're having to work across those boundaries and those functions, and bring 3 directors together, bring 3 teams together, and get them to try and work, because it doesn't matter how you physically silo it, that data flow is continuous, if you know what I mean. It doesn't stop because there's an org structure that says, well, there's a different function. So I think if you're asking me on a blank piece of paper what's the best way to approach it, I don't mind running it as an expanded project controls team or a PMO, because technically out here it's a similar thing in that process. But you need to have all of those elements in there. If you don't, you're creating interfaces, and you're creating issues, and particularly there's interfaces with the technology. So you might think, well, I'm going to use this particular suite of technology, but then your other counterparts want to use different ones, and it could be issues with the data connectivity. There's issues with process, and there's issues with the way people work. So I think what I advocate when I go in and people say, we want you to set project controls up, I say, great, let's have that conversation. So I've reached a stage in my career where it's not so much me going in and asking for the job, as me saying, I'm just testing to see if I can be functional in here and can work. How have you got it set up? Well, how do you envision it? Am I going to have all of these areas so I can actually do this, or are you going to create a lot of barriers for me and make it very difficult? And that does inform your decision on what you want to do. So that's a long-winded response. I apologize. But look, I think PMO, expanded project controls team, they're interchangeable, right? But you have to have those relative core functions, or it's limiting.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, and I love the long responses, because that's the purpose of this podcast, is to get to the root of it, right? And I think you're 100% right, and I think the malleability of project controls means that we're always up for negotiation in terms of the enhancing of our roles, whereas a lot of roles, take accounting as a perfect one, or finance, they're very static. It's almost transactional nature, right? Procurement, there's an in and out, there's a start and finish of that kind of role, and they're always required, which is great. But project controls seems to always need to kind of do a 2.0. It's always enhancing itself because technology changes, maybe methodology approaches changes, the body of knowledge maybe enhances itself. So getting really into the future now, which is a fun place to be, we have an opportunity in project controls to kind of shape projects. We also have the limitless power to destroy projects with naive system setups, not having the right experience or background, not really understanding the function of project controls. We have the ability to misinform people also, so there are dangers to, and as a technology advocate, as you know, Cam, I still have this in the back of my mind, knowing that even if I advocate the best tools in the wrong hands is still a dangerous thing, right? If you know a little bit of knowledge, you can still be dangerous. So with that in mind, Cam, what are you seeing in the market from your perspective, and what have you seen on some of the big projects you worked on in terms of how is project controls going to keep up, or maybe it doesn't need to? How is it going to manage and effectively bring big projects, perhaps, or all projects into the next era, which is obviously you mentioned ChatGPT, but there are a lot of other technologies coming on board. I'd love to get your view on this.
I think that project controls teams now are focusing immensely on the technology. There's no doubt about that. In my previous role, when you have all the organizations come up and they pitch how they're going to operate and so on, a lot of it does hang around the technology, right? And then getting what the clients ask for and getting them to be able to do it at that grassroots level and then flow it through to technology. That's where the challenges they're having at times. So I think project controls in danger of going a little bit more advanced than the delivery teams are ready for. So that's certainly real. You got to bring the construction teams along with you, the project teams along with you, and make sure you're not racing ahead, chasing these sort of shiny box options to because that's what you're interested in. When I meet someone in project controls, I can tell immediately within the first few minutes, are they a tech person or are they a core project controls person, right? You get that feel. They start talking about all these wonderful things they're doing with this technology, but you're saying, well, appreciate all that, but how does it feed in? Look, I see there's a huge amount of focus put on reporting and analytics now, right? So we've gone through this minefield of, I remember when dashboards started first coming in, obviously Power BI and so on, and watching that wave go from a few dashboards to having 100 dashboards produced and fall down because they're not being supported, and reviewing them and they're not actually telling you anything. So going through this whole cycle and journey of they're going to save the world, and really it's coming back to now saying, well, you only should be putting on there something that's actually informing a decision or informing information that actually makes sense, right? The amount of dashboards that are produced, I reckon 90% of them are garbage, right? So I think definitely having a thought around those sort of things. I think what we not doing, so there's three things really for me. It's that reporting analytic piece, and getting that right, getting the right people in. There's a bit on digital engineering I'll talk about, and also the future of AI sort of stuff. But back to the reporting analytics, I've recruited a lot of people over the years that have come out of different industries, and they're really good at building these sort of data warehouses and building all the dashboards and so on. But they don't come from that sort of project construction background, and conversations where, well, if the data is not correct, that's not my problem, that's the data owner's problem, so I'll just produce these things and there's errors in them, I don't care, and all this sort of stuff. So finding the right people to come into the industry who've got the right skill sets to help. So and definitely there's a lot of work to happen in this space. I spent, goodness me, I reckon nearly 8 months implementing a data warehouse on a previous project, and when I left, it still wasn't fully operational, right? So we've got to be careful we're not going down these IT black holes, and we're not what we are doing is quick, it's efficient, it's value for money, and it's giving us a purpose. So that's reporting analytics. One area I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be in Australia, and I know they're far more advanced in UK, and that's digital engineering, and you know that. So I remember being a construction manager on projects in London, goodness me, 16, 17 years ago, and we were using 3D models to drive through and to see how we're building things and so on. I think that there's a distinct lack of skill sets here. I say it all the time. I walked into a project a few years ago and they'd mandated in their requirements 6D. And I said, what on earth are you doing? Ones I've seen recently, they're mandating 4D and 5D. I said, look, I'm not aware of anyone in civil infrastructure doing 6D in Australia. I'm not aware of anyone doing 5D really well. I know Transport for New South Wales doing a lot of work in 4D, and they're probably the most advanced, but there's still a lot of work to do. The other problem you have is the contractors doing 3D models. That's awesome. And there's a lot of great stuff out of that, clash detection, all these sort of things. But most of the operators and maintainers of these assets are still running 2D systems. So they take these 3D models and they transfer it back into 2D drawings going into their system. So I often say to these mega project clients and in the project owner teams, you need to work at the starting point with those returnable asset owners and maintainers, because if they're going to just transition, no matter what you do, back into 2D, it's great during construction, but it doesn't give you the whole life cycle value you're looking for. So I think digital engineering, we need a massive improvement. I know that, you know, the Victorian government's got policies and they've got plans, and they're starting to really get there. But most of these mega projects being built right now are nowhere near where they need to be in digital technology at all. They've missed the boat, most of them. And even the ones that are coming up soon, again, most likely not going to be. And you've had shared experiences of that, I know, with me on that as well. And the final thing is the AI stuff. So look, you know, wow, how long's a piece of string? How good could this be, right? Where I've seen it in practice, there's been a lot of predictive analysis tried to be used in planning and scheduling. So I've used software before where you get a certain amount of programs, you put them into the software, and it helps you give some predictive analysis of future activities, and talks about risk and likelihood of occurrences, and you know, all these sort of things, and learnings that it can apply, and you know, efficiencies it can find. The problem you've got with all of that sort of stuff, it relies heavily on having a very templated and standard set of information to go in. And one of the fundamental issues we've got, and you know, I hear Ben Fleberg talk about reference class forecasting, which is an absolutely great concept. But the trouble is, in less mature industries, unless you're physically templating exactly how they develop an estimate, exactly how to develop a program, transitioning that into operating budgets and schedules, and then rigidly controlling the way data is collected and then used in those standard form of templates to inform that sort of technology, it's garbage in, garbage out. You go to any organization, tier 1 organization, tier 2 in the country, and you say, right, we're going to build this job's a road, tunnel, bridge sort of project, or it's a rail project, or whatever it will be. I need you to give me your standard template, which got its standard WBS that you take all the way through. By the way, I want to see the one you've done on the other 3 projects, and I expect them all to be the same. No chance in the world. It's absolutely so. On Northeast Link, we tried to improve that situation by mandating WBS structures, WBSs, and mandating CBSs, and aligning the WBS and the CBS. And you know, the industry found it very challenging, very, very challenging. And the results, we'll see how that goes. But we believe we finally aligned on a mega project cost and time. The challenge is now going to be when they're in delivery, that they're actually capturing that information against that WBS and CBS structure accurately. That then you could honestly say would be able to inform 2 things: future predictive analysis, but also benchmarking. Get a lot of owners running around saying we've got great benchmarking, but when you look at the way that's been established, the way the data is collected, and the way it's represented, it's garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, I feel like, and we've had John Holman talk about reference class forecasting on the podcast, which is great, right? And I think for the US market, where there is maturity, it makes 100% sense.
Oil and gas and mining, where they've got, you know, in oil and gas in particular, they've got templates, and they say that's how you're going to put that schedule together. That's how you're going to estimate. And you actually capture the data. I've done that when I worked at BP years ago. It works, but not in our industry at the moment.
Yeah, and that's the challenge is how do we get it over? Because obviously you mentioned the UK and 3D modeling, and look, BIM and digital engineering effectively been around for a long time. We're talking decades. So what is it? I think the UK, they did something different. They had a kind of a mandate from government to say, well, it's not an option. Obviously that caused some stir and it disrupted the market, but you know, they got over that, and you know, people adopt what they can't resist no longer, right? They have to get on board at some point. We haven't really done that as a collective yet. Do you see that in the future? Is that something that's on the cards, do you think, eventually?
I think it is. I think a large amount of things are client driven, right? I find that if the client wants it, it's a chance it will happen. Contractor driven, contractors are more reactive, right? Some are better than others, don't get me wrong, but contractors are typically more reactive. If they know that the client wants it, they've been asked to do it, and they've been paid for it, they're going to do it. Are they going to go off and spend a lot of time developing something and offer it? Some do, don't get me wrong. There are some out there that are certainly proactive, but most are reactive. I found in the UK, it was driven very much by the clients. I think in Australia, our client base has a lot to learn from the opportunities of these sort of things, and it just comes down to the fact that it's not being widely used. But I think digital in particular is going to obviously improve. As I said, the fact that the state governments now, you know, really got plans and policies and ideas of where they want to go, and yes, they're going to have to work with asset owners and all this sort of stuff. I think there are a lot of people that are in every mega project now who are definitely very keen and see the value of it, but it's still at that cost benefit piece here. You know what I mean? I'm going to bring all these resources in and do all this stuff, but what am I getting out of it? And we're saying, well, you know, there's obvious benefits, but the people who are making decisions, that comes down to the fact they've probably never seen it in practice before. And pockets of the world do things differently as well, obviously. So they do BIM very, very well in the UK. In the States, I mean, when I went to the States a few years ago for a conference there, Advancing Project Controls, that's the first time I saw them, the way construction entities were using drones out in the field. So beyond, you know, like if you're working for a gas pipeline company, it would just run a drone on the you know, hundreds of kilometers on the route. They're actually using drones to replace humans. So for instance, you know, if you had to go out and do safety inspections of scaffolding and all this sort of stuff, they'd actually send the drone up instead of a person up. So using it in safety implications. And now I'm seeing here the use of drone technology on mega projects a lot more, but that's only been the last couple of years. And they're using it for surveillance, they're using it to check quantities, they're using it for site progress. So it's about borrowing little pockets. The other skill set I think in the UK is phenomenal is the British QS. So when I was a project manager and construction manager in the UK, I fell in love with British QSs, and I found these people immensely professional, and they were great. I mean, a QS and a planner every single day. You'd have resource loaded, quantity loaded programs. Every day they'd go out and they'd do site measures of what the progress was. They'd come back, they'd update their program and the cost, and they were phenomenal. And the company I'm working for now, Systech International, is a large amount of British QSs. And I've been using British QSs for the last 6 or 7 years in different entities and training them to be cost engineers. And I found that they're far better than using, you know, straight standard engineers and so on. They really do pick it up quickly. So there's different skill sets around the world that you need to rely upon and build upon, right? But yeah, I think definitely it comes down to convincing. With anything to do with project controls, your biggest challenge always is that executive support. And I said in my speech last week, I was asked a question about how do you go and implement all this stuff? And I said, well, the very first thing you do, you walk in, you ascertain whether you've got executive support or not. If you don't have that executive support, then go home, update your CV and get the heck out of there. Because that executive support is everything from the resources, approving the resources you're going to need, the functions you're going to actually run, the resources you're going to need, the technology that you can bring in. All of that is down to that executive support. And the problem I do find is most executives are aware that what we do is a good thing. They just can't articulate why. So a lot of them struggle with the why. And you've just got to be, as I said, you've got to be very careful you've got that support, because if you don't, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to be successful in your role. And things like BIM have to be driven by the asset owner. They've got to be driven by the executive of saying, yes, we see value in that. We want to invest in that. And we want that. But not only that, the practitioners have got a lot to do with this as well, right? I've seen a lot of practitioners go in and spend many years, consultants and others, and not be able to deliver in this space. So I think the challenge is on the practitioner to get a lot of quick wins when you walk into a mega project and keep that momentum going. Because if you don't, you spin those wheels, you lose support really quickly.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you there. And I guess going into the kind of the roles, and I love the idea that, you know, I have the same view as you, as QSs are fantastic. Because one of the things QSs and really good planners do is they provide a lot of metadata. They provide a lot of information rich that is verified and validated before you. So my view is that when you get to the top, you know, as you said, I think earlier, shit in, shit out. But as you get to the top, you're effectively consolidating information. And if there's anything wrong in that information set, it discounts the entire set of data. And so then when you try to present something forward, and project controls always get slammed for this. Something's wrong with the data. What happens that you're in a review and then someone goes, that's not true. And all of a sudden the meeting is in a frenzy because they've lost confidence in the information. Has that ever happened to you as well?
Every project, every single project. So I think I've set up project controls in 6 or 7 entities now over the last 15, 16 years, entities or projects. And every single time you do, at the start, it's a combination of you have to bring the people in, so you're resource short, you've got to develop the process, and then you've got to get the technology working. And most times the technology is not working, so you've got all these ad hoc workarounds and all that you're cobbling together. When you get into your monthly reporting and your monthly review process, and I'm just setting this up on Suburban Rail now, actually, and when you start going through that, I always say to people that first 3 to 6 months, it's going to be softly, right? It's not perfect. It takes time to get it right. So even when you sit down with the executives and you sit down with the relevant people, you say, right, well, what do you want to see in a report? And by the time you finalized all of that and what data you actually have and what you don't have, and then it's about making sure that the integrity is in that data. And it usually you do get 2, 3, 4 months where there are errors. There's no doubt about that. You put your hand up, mea culpa, we'll go away, we'll address that. The problem is once you get to that point between around 4 and 6 months, though, that's where it's critical that you've got it working, because beyond that, then they start to lose faith in the information that's being presented. And I've been in these meetings where the executive turn around and say, we don't trust the information you're giving us. And you've got to go back to your team and say, well, this is our last chance. We either get this right or we don't. And you know, in any project, you know, particularly these mega projects when they're awarded now, the contractors don't have the people, right? So you award the contract, they say, thanks very much, let's bring them in. So over months and months, they start bringing people in on their side of the fence. They start bringing together their process, cobbling together the technology, and start generating rubbish, really. And it takes the contractor 3 to 6 months to start giving you something credible. And so from a client side, when you're receiving that, plus all the additional client information you've got, there is that journey to go on. And I advocate that very strongly. It takes between 3 to 6 months to get it running well. But beyond that, if you don't have integrity in your information, you've got maybe 1, 2 monthly reviews and you're dead in the water, right? That's how critical it is. The start of the project and getting everything set up well, you don't keep going back to the well with these guys, because they'll just say, we don't trust it. And when they don't trust the information you're producing, it undervalues or devalues your entire function. And that's a big problem. So that credibility is important. The first 3 to 6 months, you've got to have the resources as quickly as you can and really work very, very hard to get up and running. But don't bite off more than you can chew as well. Don't try and implement your entire full suite of reporting immediately. Implement what's important. Start talking about cost and time. And, you know, if you're starting a new project, what are those first few things you've got to do? You've got initial payments. You've got, you know, any potential claims that come through initially, all those sort of things. But focus on the things that are at that front end, getting design happening, getting management plans happening, all that sort of stuff, helping contractors get to where they need to be and establish. And that's the other thing as well. Most client organizations now, what we do, when you've got, which we always do, you've got KPIs sitting off reporting, you always give them a 3 to 6 month leeway at the start. You don't sit there and say, well, we're monitoring you from day one, and if that first report's not perfect, you're in trouble. You've got to have that flexibility. But yeah, you're right. You won't do it too long beyond that 6 month mark. I tell you, you'd just be dead in the water.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and you know, I think that's the pressure on project controls to find new ways of kind of adapting technology that will help that workflow. Right, we want to get to a point where, you know, validation and verification, I think, is still a human's job, but the workflows between stations, let's say, that should be something that we can do relatively quickly. And the other challenge, I think, as well, and before we get into super future, is this monthly cycle. So, you know, I find it very interesting to me that a month end for all projects is the same. And why I say that is, and I know you're smiling right now, is the 2 weeks of updates and then 2 weeks of reporting and then back into the same cycle. What ends up happening is, unfortunately, we end up talking about things that have already happened, the lagging indicators, the things that we kind of like, what, I mean, we might be close, but we're like, nah, it's kind of where it is, you know, now we need to respond. And I find like we haven't shook that up in a while. Is there a future in your world, Cam, where calendar and cycles and the rotation of available data and information is slightly separated, or are we stuck in this perpetual cycle forever?
It depends on what your purpose is, right? So I love the month-end cycle. It's critically important. And you're right, though. It is 2 weeks, 2 weeks, right? So when you're in the trenches, you literally got 2 weeks off, then you're in 2 weeks month-end always. I think I've seen it done so many different ways, right? So I've worked in organizations where we've had systems that got live data, right? So people can go in, executives can go in any stage, and they can see what's going on. I find unless you go through some form of reconciliation process, i.e. month end, that data is useless because stuff comes in and out all the time and it's uncontrolled, right? So going in and seeing, you know, something coming in, something going out of a system, unless it's gone through that lock off that update, that finalization, that adjustment process, then that data isn't relevant for proper reporting. It's okay to see daily progress and that sort of stuff. And we do. I mean, look, if you're out there driving a TBM, I mean, they're obviously doing daily reports of how many meters they're getting, how many segments are going in, all that sort of stuff. Absolutely, that ad hoc. So the way I get around it is, and I'm setting this up now, is I always set up a month-end reporting cycle, and that's critically important. I see it going wrong in a few areas. The data's got to be of that most recent period, right? So I'll give you an example. The month end comes up at the end of this month. Contractor's got 10 business days to give you a report. You've got 5 or so business days to do all your adjustments, update all your systems, and then fly it through into your dashboards. By that third week, the executive's sitting down and looking at that previous month's performance, right? Now, that's as close as you're ever going to get it. Because to be fair, if all the people have to do all their jobs in there, you're never going to get it any closer than that, right? And then the board and those sort of people are sort of getting it in the 4th week, and that's the previous month. Where some organizations make an error is they put a 2-month gap between that, then the information is virtually useless, right? So that process has to happen, but it doesn't preclude the ad hoc stuff. So if you're a delivery manager or a delivery team and you want to see daily progress, you want to see weekly progress, absolutely, depending on what those task items are. So productivity is a great example. If you want to see how many precast tunnel segments have been cast or installed in a day, TBM progression, if you want to see how much track's laid in a day, all that sort of stuff. Absolutely, you can set up you can set the technology and the reports to do that, and it goes to the right people. But the month-end cycle really is for it's for the senior managers and the functional managers of that package or project to review performance, review issues, and feed that information up the line into typically CEO reports, board reports, ministerial reports, all those sort of things. So you have to, you can't avoid having that adjusted process where you're updating forecasts and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's both though. The other thing, I did work on a project once where the project director wanted weekly reviews. So you'd go out there and every Friday you'd be locked in this review in the morning, talking about what had happened the 4 days prior. You'd go off back to your team and you adjust to what you have to do. If you have one bad day that next week, there's no productivity. You need a decent cycle length is what I'm saying. And I always find a month is a decent period of time for enough activity to occur for you to analyze. So absolutely, you have to maintain it. But to your point, yes, technology is being used now to do much more ad hoc stuff, daily productivities, daily information. It just doesn't feed typically into that monthly process. On that daily basis, obviously, it culminates into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing with you and me, Cam. Most things you say are absolutely super practical and logical and make sense to everybody. What I can't understand is how we, as an industry or as a profession, perhaps move forward and look at some of these new ways of working and also have the fundamentals in place. I think there is definitely a skills gap, but I think that's pretty across the board because we've got so many things moving at the moment in the infrastructure and transport space, but all over the place. Let's get fun with this because I think we've worked with software and software vendors for a while, and you mentioned Innate, which sponsor us a Project Chatter podcast, and we're forever thankful because they are a great. Yeah, they're a great. We've worked with them for a long time. They've been with us for a few years now, but I think with software and this revelation that ChatGPT is going to solve all our problems. I guess the premise of 3D and 4D coming out, which is exciting, visual planning, which has always been something we want to happen in the market. What is like the next maybe 3 or 4 big rocks that it'll shake up our industry or at least shake up our profession? What's your kind of prediction, Cam?
Yeah, okay. Prediction. I think project controls is going to continue to grow in importance. I think without a doubt. I think that we are going to really substantiate our position a lot more in most organizations. I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing is I think there's going to be a lot of organizational overhaul. I mean, I was talking to a former colleague of mine last week, and she's working for John Hollands, and you look at the amount of investment John Hollands are putting into project controls right now, it's immensely impressive, right? People, technology, the way they're trying to. I think the contractors are recognizing this is the future. I think consultants are recognizing this is the future. I think without a doubt, project controls is going to continue to grow. But what it must do is it must continue to add value as well. I know Acciona is investing quite heavily in Langer O'Rourke as well, and CPP. A lot of these entities are investing in this now, much more so than they were 5 years or so ago, right? They're going through massive digital transformations. So I think that you're going to see the advancement in technology going to continue, right? That's without a doubt that the technological advancements are going to continue. There's a lot of vendors, are very clever people. They're recognizing, a lot of the issues. They're engaging more with the practitioners. So they're starting to adjust and really try and meet the needs of the customer. I think clients are becoming a heck of a lot smarter as well. They're employing a lot of private people and a lot of people who have got experience in this space, and they're developing a lot more as well. So I think a lot of government departments are getting a lot better in this space and acknowledging it's there. What I'd like to see as a big rock, I'd like to see a return to the basics. I would like to see, and I don't have the data on, I always say that, I'm going to write a paper on this, write a paper on that, but the ability to have the time. I would like to see somebody do some research on who is who is operating in our field as practitioners, who is in project management or project controls, and in the different functions. I'd like them to look at delivery teams. I'd like to look at project controls teams, and I would like to know how many of those people are degree qualified to be in those roles. How many of those people are members of various institutions, organizations, associated with it. How many of them are accredited in that? And that data will tell us something. A colleague of mine, David Ruda-Basson in the UK, who works with Systech International over there, he was talking to me about an entity, one of the government departments in the UK. They put everybody through APM, Association of Project Management, in their entire organisation, got anything to do with project. And I believe they've run 1,600 of them, I believe, through APM certification. So if you ask me what I'd like to see, the technology is going to do its thing. I would like to see much more focus being put on helping people improve their knowledge of project management, project controls. I'd like to see people, have a baseline, which would be very low, I would imagine, on educational and professional certification. And I'd like to see over years that continue to grow. I'd like to see people going off and doing university degrees, doing, like the Cert 4 and project controls that's been put together now by Anil and his team. I'd like to see people join these organizations and start to make a difference and get their accreditation and bring that knowledge back to their workplace. Because then you don't have somebody like me who's a near 50-year-old cranky old fella saying, what do you mean you don't know how to estimate? What do you mean you don't know how to, develop a forecast and manage a budget and all this sort of stuff to people who are in their 30s and 40s, right? So that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see some a massive improvement in I'd like to see contractors and clients enabling that for their people. I'd like to see the opportunity for people to be sponsored to do more education and more, as I said, practical development certification in these skill sets, and these numbers go through the roof. Because I swear, if anyone did that data analysis right now or research, the baseline would be so low. You'd be saying, wow, we really need to improve this. And I've tried. I've gone through all the various organizations I'm affiliated with, and I can't get a real feel on what the real membership base is and who these people are and so on. So definitely some research needs to happen there. And then, a plan of action to organizations to how they improve and invest in their people. Because you know what? You can't argue with the stuff that Ben and his team come out with. I mean, that's real data, right? And you can sit there and say, well, what are we going to do? Cross our fingers and put our head in the sand. It's all going to get better by doing nothing. It's not true. The only way you're going to improve it is to invest in your people, make the right investments around technology, make sure people are getting the experience and they're well developed. That will improve what we're doing. There are a few courses around where they try and strategically align with government departments and put them through these particular courses, but they're not hardcore project management courses. That's what we need. We need people educated.
Well, it probably means we need more people like yourself who've been on projects going back into the educational side of the spectrum, because we don't really have that. And that's probably arguably where there's a bit of a gap. And I know there are, like the Project Controls Institute, looking to beef that up in Australia, but it's going to take more than a couple of people. And as far as I can understand, at the Project Controls Expo last time we spoke, the handful of people that kind of put their hand up to be trainers in that certification space for project controls specifically
Yeah.
we all knew. So
Yeah.
we can't possibly train thousands of people. I mean, unless there's
It's the
some
same,
different.
and I'll tell you what, I don't know about you, Val, but I'm retiring in 10 years. So, to everybody who's going to listen to this podcast, if there's anything you need me for in any of these spaces, you've got 10 years.
Exactly.
And then,
Perfect.
I'm flippant with that. But what annoys me about that is then that'll be nearly 40 years of experience walking out the door. 35, 40 years of experience walking out the door. And I used to be very critical. We used to have all these really cantankerous old fellas who were construction experts, in the tier one companies. And I used to say, why aren't we putting all these kids with them and learning off them? Because and they just retire. And all that knowledge, decades of knowing how to build bridges and roads and tunnels, walks out the door. So yes, I think
Yeah.
you're right. I think bringing people who've got the experience into training, education, that's a big part of the solution. Big part. I have spoken to a lot of universities over the years, and I do look at the people, and they do talk about bringing people in and so on, but I still find some of the courses they're offering just aren't relevant to the practical application. I find that they're still too focused on PMBOK and that sort of stuff that just, it's not enough on real life experiences of what you're going to find when you get out there. Do you know the amount of young ones I have who do their construction management degrees and they come in and they spend 6 months with us and I have a cup of coffee and they say, this is nothing like what we learned. Nothing like what we learned. And I said, yeah, that's a gap. So
Yeah,
there's
I
a
get
lot
this.
of work in that space, my friend. A lot of work, yes.
Yeah, it's good. Well, look, it's been almost an hour, but before we go, I do have one more question around the applications of ChatGPT and maybe the warnings. Cam, where would you see for those that are using ChatGPT on a regular daily basis, even if they're not, yes, practitioners or been in the project teams long enough, we see it used across and I can actually pick it out now. I can honestly almost see it because there's no substance to it. It's generic. What do you say to guys? If you want to use ChatGPT, how do you use it properly? Is there a way to use it properly? Is it going to enhance our professions, or is it going to hinder them? What's your view on that?
My view would be put your phone down and pick up a book. I it's funny. I've had some recent examples. One of my best mates, we were working on a tender together, and we're writing returnable schedules. So I was sitting there, beavering through writing this returnable schedule based off my experience and coming out of the noodle and what I'm going to do. He was sitting there on the phone to me while he's watching the ChatGPT algorithm write his response, and I said, "You are going to write." They said, "Look, everything you write, we'll just feed into it, and it'll just keep tagging it and developing it and so on." So there's a fundamental gap and issue with that though, because it hasn't got the ability to have my experience and to relook at things and change. So I think there's definitely a place for it. And I've seen some young ones working with me at the moment. They'll be in Excel and they want to understand there's a problem they want to solve. They want to understand how to develop a particular formula to solve that problem. They chuck it in GPT and it does it for them. And you know what? That's cool. I mean, that's quick. It's cool. The question I ask is, what are you learning? So if you're trying to do something and you're not learning through trial and error, and realizing what works well and what doesn't work well and how you make mistakes, how you're learning if you're getting something to do everything for you all the time. That's what worries me. Tying it back into my earlier conversation when I said about it's a diluted level at the top and the young ones aren't being trained and developed the way they should be. If they then start relying on technology to give them the answers rather than learning how to create an estimate or build a budget or whatever it would be, run a risk analysis or a schedule risk analysis or anything like that. If they're just basically type it into something that's telling them step by step what to do, how are you learning? That worries me that will dilute the knowledge gap even further. I definitely think there's a place for all of this stuff. It's not the dominant place though. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and mind you, I work with a lot younger people now, and I am referred to as the dinosaur now. So it's but yeah, that's to say, look, there's a place for it, but it doesn't replace education and learning and experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is I guess the takeaway from there is just to temper that with fundamental studying. I think most good project controls people that I know, they're eternal learners. They're continuously learning, reading, exploring, and there's no reason why you can't explore these tools. I think they're useful. Find a practical application. I think you just said it there. Let's share some white papers. Let's get some actual scientific knowledge back into the community. If you can use these institutions and these bodies of knowledge just to do that, I was actually talking to someone at the last Project Controls Expo. I said, why don't you guys sit together, get at the same table, start working together rather than individually? Because you've all got great things to add. I mean, I'm a big fan of AACE's body of knowledge. I think that's fantastic. Their recommended practice is useful. The approach that they have is really practical. ACOS has also got some value. There's RICS. There's all these great institutions, but they are, as you said, membership based. Therefore, they work in their own interests sometimes, and that's fundamentally sometimes at the peril of those that are interested in actually just learning of the profession, right? And this is where the chartership and that kind of thing comes into place. Yeah,
it does. And I mean, as I said, you link back to one of the early conversations we had, is that theory, strategic, and tactical piece, right? So I defy any practitioner who says they're a real practitioner if they're not aware of the theory. Now, I've read nearly everything Bent and his team have written. I agree with some and I don't agree with others. I've spent decades reading Kersner, Turner and Townsend, Gardner, Cleveland. There's so many people have shaped my thoughts on project management, project controls, and a large in that was driven through doing postgrad certs and master's degrees. But then it's professional interest, right? I've read a lot of stuff of what Dr. Peter Love's written over in the West, and I've seen quite decent debates between he and Bent over where you should measure the performance of a project from, whether it's business case or whether it's when you award a contract, and some really fundamental, interesting stuff there. But I speak to, and I send papers around all the time to my teams that I've worked with over the years, but I don't see the same amount of interest from practitioners in that theoretical side. And I think it has to be. You've got to understand, where we are in that theoretical space to be able to understand how you can strategically and tactically apply project management or project controls. And look, it's no one thing. There's a fundamental, large amount of issues why the industry doesn't perform so well. I absolutely loved Kluberg's paper on biases. I mean, that was just, you're reading it and it's just so common sense, a lot of the stuff, and it's so true. And you sit back saying, well, all of these things are real and rooted in good, scientific foundations as well. But we're not teaching people. We're not doing enough to educate people to understand the theory behind what we do. And there's way too many people in our industry who don't have that theoretical, strategic, or even tactical knowledge to apply, and it all adds up at the end of the day, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does. It does. It definitely does. And look, really appreciate your time, Cam. We're going to have to get you back on to do a part 2. I think we might even get you on with a few other people to talk about how we bring back a bit of that scientific inquiry to project controls, because I think whilst we can talk about the future, we still need to manage the fundamentals and the foundations. And I think that's what your point is today.
Yes,
any final thoughts, Cam, before we head up to the end of the pod?
No, I think you summarise it really well. I mean, that's my bugbear for the next year or so is getting back to the basics and how we get people around the fundamentals and how we improve from the ground up. To be totally honest, I think that it's well needed. But look, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure having a chat.
Always, as usual, Cam. We'll definitely catch up soon, mate. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for this evening. If you like what you heard, you can pay it forward by sharing a link to this episode on your favorite social media. A big, massive thank you to Cameron Mills, and a thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From the Project Chatter podcast, it's bye for now.